So contingent, and like I said earlier, if you start blurring the lines between response and scenarios and contingency plan requirements, they're really, it's apples and oranges. And we're not discounting the initial response, the fire, the first responders in that area. It's just that, like Yvonne said, you cannot list a fire department and then we cannot go out and ensure that that fire department can respond. Right?
That's equipment and personnel
To
that
an
the
oil
responsible
spill,
party has to
not to a fire, because local government is going to continue, thank you, Cindy, local government is going to continue to do what local government does, and that's respond to hazardous materials incidents. Whether it's oil, fire, explosion, that's not the line of business that we're in. Our business model on the marine side is responding to oil spills and holding contingency plan holders accountable to contract with the right response resources and then to show up and actually use those when they get there, protecting our resources of California.
In fact, the equipment we're talking about is skimming and booming generally,
Right.
and theoretically, aerial dispersants, that kind of thing. Our equipment standards are not fire trucks and ambulances and whatever you might need to evacuate people or toxic. Well, that's not the kind of equipment we're talking about.
Right.
It's just basically skimming and boom, on water shoreline protection type equipment.
Yvonne talked about ICS. We're well aware how an incident is managed, right? We ensure that spill management teams can do what they say they can do also. You will fold in, you will do the initial response and then you will fold into the unified command like we do in ICS, right? It either grows or it shrinks. That's the beauty of the incident command system. Yes, ma'am.
So I just have a couple of questions. Are you going to be mandating inclusion of things like memorandums of understanding between private agencies? Because just like fire and law have the master mutual aid agreement in the state of California, it works very well. We really don't have to worry about them borrowing resources. But when you look at the medical and health realm, which are privately owned resources, it's a completely different story, and we have trouble sometimes going outside the OES regions. So companies like American Medical Response and people who have ambulances are required to actually have a means of pulling in from competitive companies resources to be used on a mass casualty incident or something for emergency transport. And then I also was wondering, are you requiring information sharing and situational analysis from these private industry partners to the local emergency management, emergency services divisions, so that they're not doing something that our responders don't know that they're doing in the field and the information is flowing?
It's a great idea. It's a great idea. And we'll capture that. Sharing information so you're in the loop on what's actually happening, right? The locals are actually in the loop of.
But I also think that this is a good example of why we're having these scoping sessions. That aspect of it may be a little bit beyond sort of the contingency planning and certificates of financial responsibility, but both of these last questions are all about what is that integration really going to look like? How are we going to maintain communications? We all know that in emergencies, communications is one of the first things that needs to be fixed. And so I'd love to talk with you guys after this as to what this really looks like, even if it's beyond what's going on in contingency planning, because it is a part of an integrated program.
And I think you should mandate that they also have training and participate in the California Standardized Emergency Management System, because we don't only use ICS, we use SEMS in California, so they have to understand both.
Is that not addressed in the SPCC plan or the 1960 Dogger stuff?
I'm sorry, I have not read that.
Okay, and we'll look into that, because that's a great idea. If it already exists, then we'll just use what's already out there. But yeah, we would hope that training is conducted. Thank you very much. The last thing is the group wide oils, and I don't know how relevant this is to rail. The Canadian tar sands that's coming in. Is that relevant? Rail folks?
You need to find those.
Group 5 oils are the ones that are heavier than oil. The specific gravity is heavier than water.
Yeah, it's
coming by rail.
asphalt, but
Asphalt? Yeah, we
and
do.
the oil that moves out of the area along the coast over there is a sinking oil.
Beautiful. So
So that stuff goes right to the bottom.
that will be part of their
And
contingency.
the Canadian oil
Canadian pricing.
will go right to the bottom. The tar
Thank you, sir.
sands are-
So that would be also a new concept for rail.
And once they get the volatiles out of the Vulcan group,
One more concept I want to throw at you is when you skim oil off the water or you pick it up, you have to put it somewhere. And on the marine side, Steve Ricks, we can talk a little bit about this in depth, but we went from over here with temporary storage to maybe some middle ground. It's still not right, but what we'd like to do is we'd like to get feedback on temporary storage. And really this is just if you pick it up, you have to store it somewhere. That's what that slide right there talks about. So is it enough? We don't know. Because, skimmers don't pick up just oil all the time. Some skimmers are more efficient than others. But, you're on the hook to contract with storage and then do something with it. WCN, Brian talked about this. I'm not going to talk about it. It's either tell us that you hang out with OWCN or you do it yourself. Drills and exercises. Lots of discussion about drills and exercises with our team. What's already out there, who's doing what. Like I said, the rail has, there's PHMSA and there's the PUC and lots of people already conducting drills and exercises. We don't want you, go ahead, Jane.
The dams, I'm familiar with dams in my area, they have drills and exercises too, but they stopped inviting fish and game to them. So that's, yeah. Like count
That's not going to happen. So we're not going to redo anything that's already out there. So rest assured that we're working together. Don can testify that we're actually coordinating this GUI program. It's an unannounced government-initiated unannounced exercises or government-initiated unannounced exercise. I'm not really sure. It's a weird acronym, but GUIs. The Coast Guard and the EPA and the state are all working together so we don't double drill. We work together to conduct these unannounced drills, and we're not continually conducting unannounced drills because, well, we're not staffed to, now that we're statewide, we're not staffed yet, hopefully one day, to do unannounced drills over and over on plan holders. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. If they do well, we should leave you alone. And the ones that don't do well, we should revisit.
so Chris, you also need to take into account Federal Railroad Administration, PHMSA.
Yep.
right,
We've got to do drills for that too.
right.
Right.
And so while you're coordinating with EPA and all the other folks, you need to coordinate with FRA and PHMSA too.
And absolutely, we're going to do that. We have a drills and exercise calendar now for, you have to give notice and you have to tell us when you're going to have a drill. And we go with a wonderful drills and exercise team, and he's part of the team. We do a pretty good job on the marine side. We'd like to roll that onto the state and then work with our federal and state counterparts. So as long as you're meeting all the objectives and you're testing your plan once every 3 years, making sure that it works in an emergency, that we're done. And then on top of it, we have other requirements on the marine side. This is a concept. Yearly spill management team tabletop exercises announced. If you own equipment, we expect you to be able to know how to use it and deploy it. And then the unannounced drills that I just talked about. And then also, if you do conduct a drill with somebody else, EPA, some other PHMSA, that you submit for credit and we give you credit for that. And so you're in our databases having done your drills and exercises.
So Chris, and I'll put the Transcare hat on for a minute. We do a lot of drills all over the country, in the state, with different emergency response agencies under the Transcare banner when we're doing training. So would those count towards the plan?
If they fall in line with the NPREP requirements, the objectives, and you can look at any federal or state requirements that talk about the NPREP requirements. It starts off with notifications, staff organization, and it goes on down through. If you fall under one of those and you're meeting the criteria, we should we could absolutely look at those. Because, you know, the whole goal is to make sure your plan works in an emergency. It's that simple. You know, I mean, we don't want to just recreate the wheel here, because there's lots of people already conducting drills and exercises. And lots of agencies that are, you know, staffed like we are with very few people, that we don't want to continually drill folks that already have been involved. And I think that's Yvonne.
Yeah, so thank you, Chris. And I don't think I'm going to need the pointer. So this is the point where I said that at the end of each session, if there are specific, because we showed you concepts, right? Chris talked about our concept of a reasonable worst case spill for rail would be some percentage of that train, right? What percentage should that be? If you're talking about daily recovery rates and OSROs, sort of what equipment is out there, you know, conceptually, what does rail think about that? And site-sensitive strategies and drills. We assumed that there were going to be a number of things that folks wanted to add in these talking points. And anything else that you want to add having to do with contingency planning, reasonable worst case spill, drills and exercises, now is the opportunity for folks to provide that feedback here. So why don't we start with contingency planning? Anybody have thoughts about substitute plans, addendums to existing plans? And what that means is, as Chris talked about, you know, we are not interested in generating planning documents for just the purposes of killing more trees and generating planning documents. On the marine side, for vessels, often vessels that come along the West Coast, they use a Coast Guard plan, right? And then they have an addendum to that Coast Guard plan to meet Washington requirements or Alaska requirements or Oregon requirements or California requirements. And it's meant to be in addition to what the Coast Guard already has. And so conceptually, if you think about that, is that something that makes sense for rail, right? Because rail, very much like vessels, you know, they don't want to have to do something completely different every place that they go. So in terms of substitute plans and addendums to existing plans, we'd like to hear back if that's a concept that you think has value and is reasonable for rail.
We're already covered under 130.
Right.
So I guess then we could do an addendum.
Right, and okay, so I think in that respect, it makes sense for you to think about an addendum to an existing plan, okay? And in that particular case, as Chris has talked about and we've all sort of covered, is that the addendum would have to do mostly with the environmental aspects that are not normally in these kinds of plans, right? There are emergency responses, there's air monitoring, there's all those types of things, but there's not site-sensitive strategies having to do with watersheds, right? So that's what specifically we would bring to that. Does that seem reasonable? I'm just looking at the two rail folks. I know there's probably, and then, does that seem a reasonable approach at this point?
We're going to hold off on making our comments about what's reasonable.
Okay.
We do want to, we're here to listen, and
Okay,
so
okay,
in terms, at least I speak on behalf of UP.
Okay. okay,
Not being a set for.
okay. Yeah, Jane?
Like Phil Fuller mentioned, we do have the Upper Sacramento River plan, but it is 22 years old. I'm
Right.
not sure, I know that the railroad had one also. I'm not sure if theirs is as outdated, but we have some up there that we could start with.
Right. So the planning that needs to go in coordination with the contingency plans is what I'm hearing. You know, getting that geographic response plan workload moving would be helpful for this as well. And I know that the railroads have, because I know that our folks have been in contact with them about working together collaboratively on those plans as well as with EPA. So, yes, please.
I just want to make sure that in the plans that there is inclusion of some of the concerns from local government.
Okay.
A lot of local governments have already developed resolutions
Okay.
regarding the notification of what types of products are being moved through the rail areas in, say, like for the city of Oakland
Okay.
and other highly populated areas.
Okay.
And so I hope that in plan development,
Okay.
that those resolutions will be specifically looked at.
Okay.
And, you know, obviously, everybody's going to have their own specific types of concerns in each area, but maybe the highest concerns for notification of movement of product through a highly populated area, different things like that, and, you know, the air quality monitoring and all of that. You know, it's going to go in there, but it's also going to be included and communicated, like you said, through information sharing to the government.
Okay. Did you get that comment, George? Okay. Yes, please.
Since your program focuses on oil, capturing of oil and the mitigation of cleaning up a site because there's contact with water.
Right.
I think the railroad, you know, I'm not speaking for the railroad, I'm speaking as FRA.
Right.
If the carrier is, if your program is focusing on that, under your contingency plan requirements, the railroad would be cleaning up a waterway. I think instead of them trying to come out and saying, well, this is what we're going to do,
Right.
should they not be provided whatever the state standard is, and then, well, that state standard of cleanup
Right.
incorporate local, state, county, city standards,
Okay.
because there's different measures, okay? So I can, as simple as I can put it, as a married person, there's a husband clean standard and there's a wife clean standard, right? So I think if you give somebody something like that, especially a carrier,
Right.
what exactly do they need to do to meet a state standard
Okay.
or a local county?
Okay. Okay. Yes. Oh.
Are you gonna do it after?
No, we're going to do it after, yeah, perfect, thank you. So I guess the question is, taking into account what cleanup standards are going to be for the carriers, where it exists, and to make sure that at least the carriers have an idea of what that looks like in advance. Okay. Yes, go.
Not to fail to mention federal standards and how clean is clean.
Right.
One of the toughest parts about any response.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So no, I'm assuming that that's all government agencies that have jurisdiction over that area.
Yeah.
Federal, state, local, et cetera.
Yeah, we have the Part 130, which is, I guess, tied in with the Federal Water Protection Act. For those who were in the old DOT Navy, I mean, you know, back then, that's what Part 130 was, about oil and as it pertains to waterways.
Okay,
The DOT just announced last week an amendment to HM 251B, which speaks to Part 130 and to have comprehensive spill reporting and contingency plan. So are you guys looking at that as well, as what the federal is going to be proposing?
Are you talking about what's it, is it OIRA?
What's that?
Are you talking about what is being kicked around in the OIRA?
It's the advance notice of proposed rulemaking, Part
I don't
130.
think there's any language out yet.
Yeah, no, they put it out last week. It's HM 251B.
Okay, I was looking and I couldn't find anything on their website.
It's on there.
okay, great. So the answer is obviously yes. We will be looking at
I've
it.
got a copy of it.
That'd be great. Thank you. Yes, please.
Just as a follow-up to the contingency plan addendums, we have in one case, or this, after the Cantera Loop
Right.
incident, the Sacramento River plan has a lot of those features already in place.
Right.
But as James said, it hasn't really been updated
Okay.
for 22 years. It just seems as an appropriate time, at least in Region 3, to take what's there, build upon that, and
Right.
build those features in.
Right.
And also then reacquaint everybody with what responsibilities are out there.
Right.
Because I know it has the sensitive site protection, it has places to go into the river for booming, it has all of those kinds of things. I don't believe that the Feather River Plan has all that. So it's a
Right.
good time to maybe come up with a template, at least looking at what's there and say, this is acceptable features in it.
Right, that's a good, did you get that, Joy? And the other part is I know that Randy and our head of scientific, Julie Yamamoto, as well as Jana and a number of other folks are looking at sort of prioritizing of what there is in quote-unquote inland, right, in the watersheds, and what already has plans. It would take a little bit of time to update versus what needs to generate real plans and what that looks like. And we're also working with Don at the federal EPA and a number of other folks as well. So it's, as you know, it's hard to get 57 things up and running all at the same time. So we appreciate the input and the ongoing collaboration that I know we're going to be having with you folks. Yeah, Don.
Just to go back to the cleanup standard
Okay.
issue, okay. What really counts is being able to contain and remove the oil.
Right.
And that's very straightforward. The individual cleanup requirements are something you're gonna have to not address in this very well, because your individual water boards, everybody else can have a piece of it. So just
Right.
acknowledgement of those other things is
Right.
fine, but you're never gonna get to a cleanup standard. And that's a false expectation.
So,
But that's not addressing the contingency plan anyway.
Right,
So we,
yeah.
that's
So
what we
it's
have to stay on
it's-
track here.
It's containment and removal of the oil, that's what
right.
you're looking at.
That's a unified command decision, that's when there's an actual spill. That's, the contingency plan comes way before that.
okay, great. So, hold on one second, Kathy.
I was
Judge?
just going to point out that there's a STRAT process for shoreline cleanup technique that includes sign-off. So
Right.
all trustees or anyone who has a piece of the action essentially has their chance to say, yes, this is clean.
Okay.
And also, what we're trying to do in this advanced stat area planning is identify the habitat on all our major watersheds ahead of time.
Right.
So we can look at different methods that would be appropriate. And in that process, looking up at the standards, they wouldn't be firm, they would be identified during the process, during the actual response. But having a good handle on it at the beginning, so you can then identify how badly you're going to be hit economically, you know what I mean?
Okay.
All right.
Kathy,
And that actually kind of is what my question is.
Okay.
Once those highly sensitive sites are identified, is there any talk about restricting movement of product through these areas?
So we are happy to take the comment. As you know, there is ongoing discussions with the railroads and with what's going on nationally about what is preempted, what isn't preempted, what that all looks like. So we are happy to take comments on what people are concerned about, but that's not something that we can take a look at in terms of these emergency regulations at this point in time.
Okay,
Our
does
jurisdiction is
anything
not-
exist
not
right
the
now?
I'm sorry?
Are there any restrictions that currently exist?
I don't know. I'm not a railroad operator.
All right, it was just a question.
Yeah.
For, like, kind of for the.
But Joy, can you get the comment down that there are questions having to do with routing and restrictions of railroads to certain areas? Great.
That's not our jurisdiction.
Yeah, it's not our jurisdiction. So yes, please.
On the contingency plan,
Yeah.
in the current model you use right now, are the contingency plans built in the geographical areas
Yeah.
and signed off in geographical areas? I'm not familiar with the OSPR contingency plan.
Right,
Or
so,
the required.
so,
So are you, if they are, I guess my question goes to, moving in on a contingency plan piece, are you thinking about having contingency plans being specific to geographical areas? That's where point's good.
so we are happy to take the comment. I know Chris can talk about what we do on the non-inland side, right? We have facility plans, we have vessel plans. The facility plan, all the plans come into Sacramento, and then the facility plans go out to the field, where our field staff go out and verify what's in the plan, work directly with those facilities. We are happy to entertain, your suggestions of what that would look like. That's a harder thing when you talk about a railroad, right? That may come down and cover the entire state. If you're talking about a production facility or a pipeline that's in one particular area. So we're happy to take comments on it. Chris, please.
So let me talk about San Francisco. It's an ACP Area 2, and because it's so geographically diverse, there's GRAs, Geographic Response Areas, within this ACP Area 2, right? Because there's so many sensitive site habitats within San Francisco Bay, they've broken it down into GRAs. So ACP, GRAs, GRPs, yeah. So what we want to do is we want to be able to get you know, whatever we call these hunks of California, to have a plan that addresses all these GRPs, that would be great. That way a plan holder that transit or does business in any one of these can cite those plans. Right, like anybody that transits into California can cite the ACP Area 2. They have committee meetings, the states and heads work all closely together. They work really well. That concept would work well also inland, in whatever how we break up the state.
We just need to get there.
And that's why we're here today, to get feedback on how we should break the state up and how, you know, how we can look at these plans to make it easier for the plan holder that does business in these areas, these risk areas, to point to sensitive site habitats. Now, the onus is on the plan holder, of course, to identify sensitive habitat, but working with the state together, in our state and federal partners, we want to identify that habitat together. That way, you just say, in your plan, refer to this one. And then when there's a spill, they pull out the ACP like they do now, or whatever we call this document, and that's how they plan appropriately.
So I am mindful of time. It's close to 11:30, and we do have certificates of financial responsibility. It will go much faster than this because contingency plan has so many components associated with it. So I just want to check and see if there are other yes, please.
I couldn't tell from Chris's presentation whether you're stating there's an optimum time frame to get water cleanup recovery equipment into an area. I couldn't tell whether that's the table of 24 hours or, and if there is a time, I imagine that the quicker, the sooner the better.
Yeah.
So you're containing that. But if you also have a fire in that area, what takes precedent? I mean, there's going to be a priority there, fire.
If a meteor comes out of the sky and takes out a terminal, that kind of stuff, we could talk a lot about that, you know, scenarios and what drives spill response and all that. But for planning purposes, timeframes, planning for planning, and for, of course, for drills and exercises, we want to establish some volumes and some timeframes. So we can hold plan holders accountable to contract with the right rated OSRO and to get on scene and actually deploy the equipment on time to protect the resources. That's what these daily recovery amounts, what I was trying to show up there. They're just, it's a concept. It works on the marine side. It's tiered, right, from 2, 4, 6, 8, 12, whatever the time frames we have. That's what we need input on. Is it practical for rail to transit up and down California to have a 3-hour time frame?
So is there a threshold point where your job becomes almost impossible to recover?
Well,
We're not going into this.
impossible like how, sir?
Well, it takes years to recover.
Genie's out of the bottle.
The genie's out of the bottle. I don't get it.
So is
I'm
there,
slow.
no. Is there a point at which so much time has passed that you've lost that early window to contain it? And so now you're just.
Then we do shoreline cleanup.
Right.
That's something else you have to plan for as a plan holder, is how am I going to clean the shoreline up? Because obviously if the you know, it's running over a couple knots, by the time you get there in 3 hours, it's going to coat the shoreline. So now you're doing shoreline cleanup.
But I guess
And that's also a function of.
So I think your question is, if there's a fire, can you still get, if you don't get equipment within 6 hours, are you going to be fined or enforced against or something like that? Real world, we're not holding you to 6 hours. It's a planning standard for 6 hours. If you can't get there in 6 hours in a real incident, that's real world, that's just the way it is.
Extensities, how do you say that word?
extenuating circumstances.
Right, so real spills and stuff are done, right?
So I just, couple of things, so a couple of things, I have a couple questions back here. So I just want to make sure that, are you asking the question of whether, are you suggesting that we should have in our contingency plans to look at the potential fire aspect of what's going on rail?
Or how you deal with that stuff.
Fair enough, from a response ICS point of view. Perfect. Okay.
Are you gonna add weather?
I'm sorry?
Adding weather?
So the question is adding weather. So as Chris said, on the marine side, when we're looking at oil, we tend, and looking at trajectories, we tend to take a look at what we call the most pessimistic weather conditions, right? So for oil on water, it might be the worst tides, the worst winds coming from here and there, and then if you plan for that. So I guess maybe the question would be, do we need to take a look at that concept in dealing with this on the inland side? So,
Federal law does.
Yeah.
okay, please.
I'm looking at your statewide expansion fact sheet. The last bulletin says, response plans identify public safety concerns, resources at risk, equipment needs, and so on, working with local government. That's why I brought back the first aspect is local government is the true first responders. This bill doesn't necessarily focus the funding on the training, the ongoing training to deal with it. Right now, a lot of our local responders, thankfully the Union Pacific and me as a railroad, are going to Pueblo, Colorado for a 3-day oil response class and have a combat oil and response mitigation. Well, that's money's going to run out. And this is going to be the biggest problem in the state. This has been a 6-year concern, and that's great we're trying to address it. But there's other concerns that we've all talked about, getting that resources, getting them there. And you're asked about, well, can we do drop-by inspections? Absolutely. If you look at how the state master mutual aid program has worked to hold people accountable, that's exactly what they've already done. They ask you to have that equipment on hand. We train on it. We do drills. We try to hopefully get money to work with our other partners. But that's how it's going to work. If you want us to combat fires, you've got to give us the right foam and support it statewide. We have this biggest concept now where it has ethanol in it, if it doesn't. But that's the bigger problem. If you want us to fight fire, large caches of alcohol-resistant foam need to be available within those response contractors. So Union Pacific doesn't necessarily have to have it available to them. It's those local emergency responders having it in our backyard to combat these fires in 2 to 3 hours versus 24 hours where you're letting the whole cities burn. That's why this has been a fiasco and a half from North Dakota to Canada, and now recently, luckily didn't have one, the state of Washington had some cars come off the track.
So thank you, great point, and Joy, you got those down. Okay, so you may remember in my opening remarks, I know it must seem like so long ago now, that one of the things that I did talk about was, the OSPR program and the passage of this through the leadership of the governor and the passage through the legislature addressed this part of the problem, right? It addressed state oil spill response. It didn't address the larger concern that are being voiced by you and people all over the state of, okay, so what does it mean for local emergency responders? That has to do with training and equipment and typing and all of those types of things, and I hear you, and I'm with you, and we have been working as a part of a governor's work group that this is another big issue that's coming up, and we will continue to work within the administration to see how some of those things can be addressed. But it is bigger. That is a bigger issue than what we are doing here. So we are committed to doing that with fire, with OES. I mean, there's a number of people on that work group to see where that's going to be going. Yeah. Well, and one last question, and then obviously we are going to be here after the session, so if you have other pieces of input, I want to make sure that we get to the certificates of financial responsibility. So please. Oh, Steve, 2 questions, you and then Steve, and then we'll move on. Please.
Going back to your reasonable worst case spill volume.
Correct.
How did you come up with those numbers? Just as mentioned again. I guess the question is, what did you learn from the derailments in Quebec, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Alabama?
So did everybody hear the question? So again, what we put up was the concept that we were going to take a look at a determination of a reasonable worst case spill based on a percentage of the size of that tram, right? So it's based on the percentage of what is covered. What we have found over the time of those particular derailments is that all of them had a different cause, a different causal factor. Okay, so for purposes of planning, for purposes of FRA and safety requirements, which is probably not something we're going to be able to get into, there are other things that need to be taken into account. We're just wondering what seems to be a reasonable, and I appreciate that the railroad isn't going to comment on that, but conceptually a percentage of a cargo that you're carrying, which is what we have on the marine side for large vessels that are carrying oil as cargo, is that analogous concept reasonable? And if it is, then how should we go about doing it? On the marine side, it was one of 4 cargo tanks, because based on when a vessel hits and it does this and it does that, that's likely the most reasonable worst case spill. It's not the worst case spill, like on the federal standard, but that's not what we have. And we're asking for input of what is reasonable given that concept for rail. When trains are derail, how much is actually released? What is reasonable? That's what we're asking. Through Steve Hampton and a number of our folks internally, we can go ahead and run numbers and take a look at different things, get information from FRA, we can do that. This is just one more forum for us to ask you, what do you think is reasonable?
The current federal standard that we proposed is 1 million gallons, which is about 34 tank cars.
Okay,
So if you got a unit train, they
That's about
basically
33%
said,
then.
okay, we're gonna go about 90, almost about half of that train would release at one time. You would hit that federal standard,
right.
contingency planning, reporting, and response.
Okay, so that may be a good place to start or to look at. Steve?
Well, it sounds like you're ready to, you want to move on and wrap this discussion up, and there's a lot of questions
Okay.
about this. Where are we going to get the opportunity to give input on that stuff?
So on the stuff not covered here today, you mean?
Well, you said you wanted input,
Yes.
but you're saying now we're going to end the session, so there's not an opportunity to really talk about any of these topics. Yeah.
Okay, so Joy, can they submit things to you directly in writing?
Oh, I mean, this is an informal comment-taking process, so you can submit comments at any time. The idea was we would do it as a group setting so people can hear other folks' thoughts.
And my point is,
we have
ready to end this discussion and move on to certificate of responsibility.
We do have 2 other scoping sessions scheduled, and as Chris mentioned, I think it's likely that we will schedule more.
So I'm happy to throw this out to the group. I think that there are at least 2 ways that we can do this. Okay, this is our first scoping session, so we didn't have the best sense of how great this dialogue was going to be. Okay, so Steve, you're always welcome to submit comments to us directly. Okay, the other thing is that we will be here when we close this session. So I mean, if you want to come and talk to us specifically about things, we're happy to do that as well. The other thing I can ask the group is, if you want to stay until 12:15, we can spend another 15 minutes on this topic and then move to financial responsibility. I am up for any of those 3 things. This is as much your meeting or more than it is ours. Please, Don.
Stay till 12:15, get
Okay.
the input now.
Fair enough. Do I have general consensus within the group on that? Yeah.
I was going to say,
Is that a yes or no?
all the dialogue, in 2 to 3 months, there may be another need for another public opportunity like this. There's too many moving parts. So we're going to need something like this in 2 to 3 months.
Did you get that?
I think we should go to San Luis Obispo in August.
Okay. Yes. Okay, so before I continue, I just want to get a general consensus that the group is willing to spend another 15 minutes on this topic, even if it means that we're going to be here a little bit afternoon. Is that unacceptable? Please nod or shake. Okay. Okay.
Yvonne, another
Yes.
suggestion though. Your afternoon session, you may check to see how many of us are going to be here. You may
that's a very good
have a
point.
similar audience and then plan accordingly. That
Okay.
maybe we'll have some time.
So how many folks are going to be here this afternoon? Okay. So very good point. Okay. So why don't we go ahead and stay the extra 15 minutes. Having gone through this morning, we know that there are ways that we can probably shave time, and we'll find out this afternoon how many new people are actually there, so that we'll know how quickly we need to go through that, and then maybe we can use that afternoon session for a lot more of the bulk of this input. Is that reasonable for folks? Hold on one second. Shake yes, no?
Sounds good. Sounds good.
So, did you have another comment that you wanted to make? I'll get back to you in a second, Steve. Okay.
I'm thinking that you could also use the regional response team as a formal entity to gather industry input. It's one of the reasons it exists.
Right.
And you could think of that as well to use something that is
Okay.
completely legit and on board.
Okay. Okay. So, Steve.
Well, we're ready to move on to the daily recovery rates. I mean, how did it come about establishing this? What was your thinking on trying to develop those? And appreciating that
Okay,
EDRC on the ocean is not the same as it's gonna be in Sacramento River.
right. So Chris? I'm sorry, so the question that Steve is asking is effective daily recovery rates.
In recovery capacity.
Right, well, it's different potentially for marine than it is for inland environments,
Okay.
right? So obviously it was a place for us to start. If you have, I mean, if there's different data out there that shows recovery rates on streams and inland environments, we are happy to take a look at that.
There's already some federal tiered approach volumes, maximum extent practical volumes out there in federal regulations, tiered times.
On the marine side.
No, and I think that there's some inland,
I think
40
he's also,
CFR.
I think he's also talking about the 20% duration, that it makes, that was determined for marine, but may not make sense.
So
Yeah.
derating a
Right, that's what you were
skimmer?
talking about, Steve.
Steve, derating a skimmer?
Yes.
I think that's very, I don't know that that's transferable to marine to.
So we'll take that comment, and then maybe that's something we need to take a look
Spills
at.
to a lake?
Right, okay, hold on one
You
second.
don't have to worry about big waves.
Fair enough. So if you have data that you want to provide to us, I mean, again, we don't know what we don't know. We can only start with what we know, and then you provide input. So that would be great. And maybe we need to take a look at anything that's done at onset, having to do with that, right? Different weather and sea state conditions.
And, you know, the whole concept of derating takes into consideration limitations on operating.
Okay, exactly. So,
On land, that's not as big an issue as it is out in the field.
And I think when we get into production facilities and pipelines, well, and even rail, like, you know, where the rail crosses a river and stuff like that, we need to look at that. But yeah, I mean, the EDRC thing, you know, and I know that it's not a perfect formula. All skimmers are, you know, derated differently as far as efficiency goes. So that's some discussion we really need to have.
I think so too.
Yeah.
okay, excellent.
Well, and I would also encourage you in the reasonable worst case discharge and daily recovery rates is that you endorse the concept of caps like the regulations for marine do, so that
Yeah.
we can,
Okay.
I mean, we had to go out and determine every plant holder's worst case discharge.
Correct.
It would be a lot easier if you had a cap.
So you want a cap concept like what we have on the marine side? Okay. Okay. Anything else, Steve, before I start moving around?
Still thinking.
Okay, you still think? Okay, Terry.
So in following up, Steve brought up some really good points, and that also needs to be in coordination with the EPA, the 40 CFR
Right.
requirements that are existing now.
Well, I'd be curious.
Because that has EDRC type information and require recovery rates and requires containment.
But that's also, you mean on the marine side or on the
No.
inland side? Okay.
EPA 40 CFR
Okay.
deals with inland as well.
Okay, so then I guess the,
Non-
right, so then I guess the question is, did they come up with a different, not effective daily recovery rate, but a different derated capacity? For folks who don't really know what we're talking about, on the marine side, given weather and sea state conditions, we as regulators, we had to try and level the playing field to figure out what skimmer does what based on high weather, high sea state. Sometimes you can go out, sometimes you can't go out. That's response. But for purposes of planning, how much can you derate that capacity and say, we all feel comfortable that with that derated capacity, you'll be able to have enough equipment out there. And on the marine side, it was 20%. The duration capacity was 20%. And so that takes into account, 10-foot waves and high tides and things like that. So the questions that are being asked right now is, does that make sense for river environments where you don't have as many different kinds of variables? And so taking a look at what federal EPA has might be a place for us to start. Phil?
And on that note, which I want to say earlier, Don, is a fast-moving river will make tidal cycles in San Francisco Bay look like child play. And you have two shorelines, and it moves very fast. And just getting boom in the water, not being dangerous, very difficult thing to be able to capture much. So it's a whole different ballgame, as you know, and everyone in your agency knows. So that kind of discussion will have to have a lot more depth, I think.
Great. Don?
It would be of everyone's best interest to have a whole list of criteria that lay out clear differences between marine and inland spills.
Okay, go
And
ahead.
just, that would give everybody a better planning scenario, and there's a lot of things, like he said, you know, there's a lot of them, so that's not gonna come together today. But there are clear differences, and for the plan production, you need to acknowledge that they're there, because you can't just say, I've got this for Oakland Harbor, now I'm just gonna throw it over here.
Right, right. Yes, please, Jen.
And one of the variabilities below dams is, you know, are they releasing 3,000 CFS or 20,000?
Right.
So that would be, need to be in the plans. I would
Okay. So did you get both those comments, Joy, in terms of taking a look at differences between inland and marine, and one of those being water pressure being released out of dams? Okay, yes, Terry.
And I hate to be the one speaking on behalf of EPA, but their FRP process has been in place since 1992.
Okay.
And it covers a lot of the same ground
Right.
for inland spills
Right.
that you're going over. And of course, the regulations that you're proposing are going to be dealing with pipelines and terminals that are inland as well as
Right.
the rail. And so there needs to be some kumbaya between.
Well, and we
those
are meeting with EPA. We met with EPA several times, and we will continue to meet with EPA. So this is, yeah, there's going to be a well-worn groove between San Francisco and Sacramento, I think, for
Well,
quite
it's
some
the
time.
FRP, process.
Right,
that
I
we
understand.
have in place.
So how about if we hear from somebody we haven't heard from yet, and then we'll go back to our regular cast of characters. Yes, please.
Sensitive site protection. Is there thought about having government as well as industry and auditor representation in the subcommittee to look at proposed sensitive sites anyway?
So, and I would say yes, we would assume that it would be very similar to the area planning process that you have on the marine side.
You're in charge of coordinating.
Thank you for asking. Yes, Jane.
And on that, you know, Fish and Wildlife, we have a layer of sensitive sites inland on our geographic information system, so a lot of that work is already done.
Okay. Anybody else we haven't heard from?
I have a question. Actually, I've been
Matt.
sitting here and thinking,
Yep,
you have the sensitive sites and sensitive site protection.
right.
It's not necessarily waterways. There are a lot of species and so on that you may want to protect if there is an oil spill.
Right.
So are there going to be two planning criteria, one for just inland and one for if the oil gets into the waters of the state, or is it going to be just one? Because the response for each one of them are going to be different. For one, you need vacuum trucks and backhoe and that sort of thing. The other one, you need skimmers and boats.
Well, I think it's both. I mean, I think any planning would have to address
So
both.
are you going to have different time frame and different recovery rates, or,
So.
I mean, you have to think about that.
Okay, so we'll take that down as a comment.
That's the point that I made.
Fair enough.
We need to get
Right.
this
Right.
fine.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? I know that, so in terms of drills, you've heard it several times about how we are not interested in drilling people to death, which would include us, right? We are interested, I mean, the whole point of drills is to make sure that the plan is worth the paper that it's printed on, and that people know how to implement that plan. Right? We do that through drilling, we do it through a number of different mechanisms. And so if rail is able to demonstrate certain aspects of our drilling requirements based on what they're doing with local government or based on what they're doing with FRA or any of a number of folks, we are happy to take a look at that so that we don't have to do that drill again. Chris also talked about unannounced drills. We don't necessarily want to call an unannounced drill on a rail at one particular day and then have EPA or some other federal agency call one on another day. I mean, the very next day. We would want to be able to do that kind of coordination. And so with that in mind, is there anything that folks would like to add into drills before we move through to certificates of financial responsibility?